Hello, geometry. This week, we're learning about midpoints and distance. And those are two different things, but they're very closely related because they both involve looking at equations that can also be viewed as a picture, which in this case is a graph. Let's start with midpoint. Midpoint, what is it and how do we find it? First, the what is it part. The midpoint is essentially the point in the middle. So it's going to be that point in the middle, especially of a line segment in the case that we're looking at it. So the point in the middle of a line segment. Now, when we put that in more geometric terms with some other vocabulary, if it's in the middle, what that actually means is that what's to the left of it and what's to the right of it, what's on either side of it, is the same. And if it is the same, then it's the same distance on either side. And we want to use the word equidistant. And so the midpoint divides a line segment into two equidistant parts. And whenever we talk about the same distance or things being the same, we could also use the word congruent. So it divides the line segment into two equidistant or congruent parts. And so, if we're trying to find the middle, if we're trying to find the point that divides it into two equal parts, what we're actually saying, another way to talk about that is we're finding the average. So all of this means average. So the average is that balancing act of finding how it can be equally distributed among everyone, or taking a line segment and dividing it into equal parts. And in this case, it's two parts. So let's take an example where we're finding the average of something. So, example, find the average. And so let's find the average of, let's pick your favorite numbers. I want to pick 3 and 7. To find the average of two numbers, what you do is you take them and you add them together. So we're going to add 3 and 7 together. And since there's only two numbers, we're dividing it by the number of numbers there. In this case, 2. So we're counting how many numbers we're talking about that and divide it by that number. So the average of 3 and 7, the number in the middle of 3 and 7, is the same thing as 10 divided by 2, which is 5. And as you probably intuitively guessed, 5 is between 3 and 7. Now let's apply that to a line. And I'm going to talk about a line that's on a coordinate grid. So I'm going to scoot down just a smidge. So remember, a coordinate grid is like you're seeing right here. It's the coordinates based off of the lattice work from our lines. And if that part doesn't make sense either, first, let me go ahead and draw the vertical line and the horizontal line. These two lines are our axes. And so those are our axes. We have the x-axis and the y-axis. And the reason why we call them axes is for no other reason except for that's where our zeros are at. That makes a lot of sense to start from 0 because more often than not, 0 is where we start. And so we want to talk about our axes in that way. Now, every other line that you see here in blue, that is a lattice. And a lattice just means a structure or a support. If the word lattice sounds familiar, it's because you've probably talked about it or heard people talking about it anytime you reference gardens. And so when you reference a garden, I'll move to my other tab, they talk about a lattice work to be able to support plants growing. And so all of these are examples of lattices because, as you can see in this one, it's supporting the plant growing. And so a lattice work for geometry is the same thing. It's supporting us looking at the diagram. Computers are really easy at constructing and forming a lattice. I mean, it's just printed out and programmed in. I would never expect you to draw the full lattice in your document or on your piece of paper or showing your work. It's too much. You wouldn't want to draw the full lattice. Instead, when you want to reference a point or when you want to show that you're talking about something that's organized, and so I can read it and know what you're talking about, that's when you've seen your teachers just draw the tick marks down below. That's what replaces the lattice, because that's the support and the structure for me to see how far over and how far up. And labeling is essential. You can draw those tick marks, but you could have them be any sizes that you want as long as it's consistent. So they could go up by 2s or by 4s or 5s or 6s or 7s or any number you want, 100s, right? But in this case, I'm going to go up by 1s. And so I'm going to show that by marking off 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th one. Why? Because we like 5s, 10s, 15s, and 20s. We like numbers that we can count on one hand. And so that's why. There's no other real reason. It's just easy and it's part of a norm that mathematics has made. You could have named the 2 or the 4 or the 7 and there would have been nothing wrong with that. It just might have made a little bit of extra work for someone to count, and that's fine. And so go ahead and count it the other way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then voila, we have our lattice work. And the tick marks, which is what we as normal human beings would do since we're not actually computers. So in this example, talking about the midpoint, we'll pick our 2 points. I'll go ahead and I'll just read over on my x-axis the 7 and I'll count up to 4. So I'll look at this point right here, and that's the other layer here. Lattice work, we can count the lattice, which is we can count the squares. It's easier to see. But if this wasn't the lattice work, if this was just on a blank piece of paper, then you would label it 7, 4. And remember, guys, that's our x, y. We name every point x, y. So when you go into the quiz and when you go into your practice, remember to include the parentheses and the comma with the x part first and the y part second. And so that's our point 7, 4. And let's go ahead and pick our next point. Oh, let's see here. What's some favorite numbers we have? Let's go ahead and pick -3, -4. Actually, you know what? Not -4, -6. Ooh, -6. So that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Perfect. And so that's going to be our -3, -6. So let's talk about finding the average. Let's talk about finding the middle. This is our line segment. Both points are x, y. We have a pink and a green one here. If we want to find the middle, we could try to count and work through that. But math is going to help us actually do that accurately so we don't end up miscounting one of the squares, or in the rare occasion that you actually don't have squares. The good news is that we're not going to try to count diagonally. Instead, we're going to take advantage of the fact that we have this lattice. We're going to take advantage of the fact that all coordinate grids are little rectangles and squares. And so to find the average, to find the true middle here, we're going to take advantage of the fact that we could count this x separately than y. So we can find the middle of our x and we can find the middle of our y and then find the middle of our point. So if I write this out as an equation, right? Essentially what I'm saying is we want to, for our midpoint, First, recognize that it's a point, which means there's commas, there's parentheses with a comma in the middle. The x part of our point, the middle, is the average. We just talked about the average up above. We're adding two numbers and dividing by 2. So here we're doing the same thing, but since we're talking about our x values, we can do the average of just the x values, the x here and the x here. Now, I'm sure that you have always wondered how we can talk about multiple x's at once. Well, we don't really want to talk about multiple x's at once. The dating scene gets really complicated. But if you actually want to talk about multiple x's at once, what we do is it's math, we number them. And so let's go ahead and pick our green point here. I'll make this a comma a little bit more obvious that it's a comma, and I'll call this x sub 1 and y sub 1. So this is our point 1. It's our first point, so we're going to put a little 1 in the lower right-hand corner. By giving it that number, we're able to identify it as that value of x for our point 1. And we're going to do the same thing for the pink point over here, but shock and awe, I'll make that a little bit more obvious that it's a comma because that's x2 and y2. We just want to be able to say that we're talking about point 1 in green and point 2 in pink. And so our value of x, the average of our x, is going to be one of the x's, x sub 1, plus the other x, x sub 2, divided by the number of numbers we're talking about. Then we're going to do the same thing for the y's. Y sub 1 plus y sub 2, all divided by 2. And because of the fact that we're talking about addition, it doesn't matter what order you write it. You could write the second point first or the first point first. Addition can happen in any direction. All right, let's plug in the numbers. Let's actually find our average. Let's find our midpoint. So let's do the x's first. So let's go ahead and pick this wonderful green, purple. Purple's a great color. Who doesn't love a good purple? So let's do the value of our 7 and the value of our -3. So that means we're working with 7 plus -3, all divided by 2. There we go. We've written the equation for the x part of our midpoint. Let's do the same thing for the y's. Take one of the y's, take the other one of the y's, now add them together. 4 plus -6, all divided by 2. And our answer here is a point, so we're still remembering our parentheses and our comma. Now we can actually mathematically work it out. 7 plus -3, remember adding by a negative is a subtraction. 7 plus -3 divided by 2. My mental math tells me that's 4 divided by 2, so the x part of our midpoint is 2. Now for the y's. 4 plus -6 is the same thing as 4 minus 6. That's -2 divided by 2, which is -1. So our midpoint, just through the algebra, is 2, -1. We could have taken just the actual points listed, not on a diagram, and figured that out. And you'll see quite a few questions like that. If you don't quite see what's happening, don't hesitate to grab a piece of graph paper or just plain old white paper and draw yourself a sketch so you can kind of piece it together so you can see it a little bit easier. But that 2, -1 is our midpoint. So I'm going to go over 2 on the x, because remember x is always first, it's x comma y, then down 1, bam. That is our midpoint right there. That's our point, 2, -1. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's it. That's how you find the midpoint. You find the average of your x's, and you find the average of your y's, and write them as a point. I hope that helps. I hope that gives you a little bit of feedback here, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.